Hi, my name is Lucas Ridley, and welcome to this Digital Creator School video. In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about the differences between animating for feature film and visual effects and animating for video games. I've been doing both over the last 5 to 10 years, and there is a huge difference, I can tell you. So the last 2 years I've been working in video games, and prior to that I've been working on feature films like Ready Player One and Avengers Infinity War. One thing I did want to mention is that the actual act of animating is not different between the two. That's one similarity. Setting a keyframe, all of the principles that you need to know, all the skills you need to actually do the physical animation are pretty similar. There might be stylistic changes or differences, but that can be true between different movies you animate on and different games you animate on. So I think that's one possible misconception, is people think the actual act of animating is going to be different between one or the other. There might not be as much time to devote to the animation because there's other things to do in video games. When you actually sit down to do the work of animating, they're pretty much the same. So I just wanted to get that out there, that you won't have to relearn animation if you work on a movie or you work on a video game. Animation is animation, but there are some key differences between feature films and video games. So the biggest difference is that there's an entire step that you do in video games that you don't do in feature film. And that is basically what is called implementation and debugging, or kind of the two sides of that for video games. That is completely absent from feature film. So when you're working on animation, at least for feature film, you're usually given layouts, you're given the camera, the rig is pretty ready usually, and you may need to update later and tweak things, but generally your role in a feature film for visual effects is you get all the assets and you animate. And you sit down and you animate, and that's all you really do. You get reviews, you take feedback, you implement those notes into the animation. But once you're done, you kind of hand it off to the next department. They light it, they composite it, whatever it is. In video games, there's a lot more back and forth, and there's a lot more responsibility on the animator to make sure that it's working with the game. So that involves what's called implementation. So like in a visual effects film, I can animate something and then just pass it off. The difference in a video game is I animate that thing and I keep it. And then I try to get it in the engine, and I make sure that it's working in the game, and I test it, and I make sure that the transition's working, or there's no crazy wonkiness going, or sometimes if you didn't import it correctly, maybe the asset completely disappears or isn't there at all. So there's a lot of implementation just in general that you have to do for video games. I've worked mainly on cinematics, so that has a lot of transitions and making sure that things are handed off from gameplay to the cinematic correctly. And that just doesn't exist at all in visual effects. So by the nature of that, you can think about all your time as like a pie. So you have, this is 100% of your time. And in visual effects, that might be 80%, 90% animating. And on video games, that might be half or less. And that's just my rough guesstimate to give you an idea of how big of a difference that is. So the other side is debugging. So you might get something and animate it and put it in the game, and you think it's working. And then a month later, something changes with the engine or code, or the asset changes, and you get a bug from QA. So QA will give you a bug and say, hey, this doesn't work anymore, even though it was working the last time you put it in the game. So that's debugging. You need to go back, figure out what's the problem, why is this occurring? Is it something that you need to solve, or is it something you need to let someone else know to help you with, or give the bug to them to solve? If it's an audio issue or something the designer needs to work. And that's also to say, in video games, there's entire departments that aren't in the visual effects kind of pipeline, like game designers. There's not really a corollary there, and that you would interact with very much in the visual effects feature film side of things. So just to give you an idea of the amount of work that is involved in creating video games for an animator that doesn't include actually animating anything. This is a blurred out photo, intentionally blurred, so you can't read anything. I just wanted you to be able to see how many bullet points there are of steps you need to go through to get assets, animate them, and get them in game. But the tricky thing is actually none of these bullet points on this list that you can see include animate the thing now. All of these bullet points are quality control, implementation, and checking the work and recording that you've done that in Shotgun or some other program like that, and updating the status of things. So this list just gives you a quick overview of all the other responsibilities as an animator that you may or may not, depending on how the studio is run, that the responsibility will fall on your shoulders to do all of these things and animate. By the nature of that, you're not animating as much, because if you remember the pie, there's only so much time in the day. And so as a video game animator, you may not actually be sitting down and animating as much as you would on a visual effects feature film. It's something that even getting my first job in video games, I wasn't aware how much time was spent not actually doing animation, even if you're hired as an animator. There's a lot of expectations and responsibilities you have working in a video game that you don't have in visual effects feature film, where you're a bit more strictly there just to animate. So it's something to consider if you're wanting to get hired at a feature film studio or you want to work in video games. You just need to be prepared and understand where your time is going to be spent and if that's something that you want to do or not. And the other thing I'll say too is the expectation of whether or not you need to learn the engine. Everywhere I've gotten hired to work on video games, I did not know the engine before I got hired there. So the technical side of that can be learned on the job, in the first few weeks. The limited scope of how you need to use the engine, it's not going to be overwhelming or insurmountable for you to learn. So if you're a game designer or something, you will be expected to be more than proficient. But as an animator, I've not really encountered the need to have prior knowledge of the engine. You might want to know what it's called just so you know what they're talking about in the interview or something. Oh, you use Unreal or Unity. Maybe I've opened it once. Yeah, I kind of get the idea of maybe how it works, but I'm excited to learn, or that kind of a thing. But that's not really ever been the problem, because the authoring of the animation usually doesn't happen in Unreal or the game engine. That happens in another program like Maya. So if you're interested in learning a program like Maya, definitely check out my classes. I have a huge course on Maya, so you can learn everything from A to Z that a beginner needs to know and start your career in animation. And I also have a completely separate course that goes a lot deeper into the career path of getting your foot in the door and becoming an animator in the industry. It's called Break into the Animation Industry, and I hope you check that out as well. If you enjoyed this video, let me know, and subscribe and like and all that kind of good stuff, so that I know whether or not I should keep making videos like this. So thanks for watching, and look out for new classes. Now that I have this new fancy setup I just set up last week and got everything nice and ready to make my new classes. So look out for those, and leave any suggestion of stuff that you would like to see me teach as well. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.